All right, so I just finished reading Memories of Ice by Steven Erikson, which is book 3 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I think this might be the best book, or one of the best books I've ever read. If it's not the best book I've ever read, it's top 5 at the moment, so it's very high up there. Steven Erikson's a very polarizing writer. It seems like a lot of people don't like the way that he writes in the books. They feel that it's too confusing, too dense. It makes it too difficult to process. And I respect those opinions, but personally, for me, the way that Steven Erikson writes these books just makes it all the more worthwhile when you finally get through them and when things start to finally make sense. It becomes a much more satisfying experience because you've had to put in a little bit of mental work in order to get a proper understanding of what's going on. I feel like anything worthwhile in life takes a little bit of effort. So the fact that you have to make some effort to process this book is what makes it so good. So let's quickly go over the plot of Memories of Ice without giving away any spoilers. At the end of book 1, Gardens of the Moon, there are mentions of this character called the Panian Seer. It's alluded that this guy is going to be a force to be reckoned with at some point. And the Malazans are on a collision course with the Panian Seer, who has this massive army. He's got sorcerers. He's somehow turning every city he shows up at, he's turning those citizens into these fanatical cannibals who eat their enemies. It's really crazy and terrifying the more and more you find out about it. And in book 3, obviously, this is the main bad guy that we have to deal with. But what also happens at the end of book 1 is that 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 One Arm becomes rogue. And he is separated from the Malazan Empire for some reason. It's not really understood exactly why. Maybe because he lost so many soldiers at the Siege of Pale. We're not entirely sure. I don't know. It's up in the air. Nobody seems to have full belief that 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒃 really is rogue, but that's what he says. 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒃 has about 10,000 soldiers with him after going rogue, and he knows he's going to need some allies in order to deal with the threat of the Panian Seer. So who does he call but his enemies from book 1, Kaladin Brood and Anomander Rake. He brings them to a negotiation table, essentially. Now that he's rogue, they're much more likely to team up with him now that they know that there's no connection to the Malazan Empire. So they all sit down together and they make a plan. Hey, we're going to team up. We're going to defeat the Panian Seer, and then we will deal with our differences after that. So, okay, that's the main force of good guys, or if you can describe them as good in this book. It's Whiskey Jack, 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒃 One Arm, Kaladin Brood, and Anomander Rake. All of their soldiers are going to go fight the Panian Seer. Now, the farther that you get into the book, the more you realize that the Panian Seer is just a distraction from a greater threat. I can't really go into the details about that without getting into spoilers. But what I will say is, as we go through book 3, you kind of finally figure out who is going to be the main bad guy for the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We now know who the main threat is for the rest of the series. It's nice to finally have like an anchor point for the rest of the books. The Panian Seer is a big threat, of course, but we know that once the Panian Seer is dealt with, there's another threat that needs to be tackled immediately. Let's talk a little bit more about the individual characters in Memories of Ice. So Anomander Rake and Kaladin Brood are the main enemies in Gardens of the Moon, and they have a huge role in Memories of Ice. It's nice that we finally get to spend more time with them, because in Gardens of the Moon, these characters are kind of just shrouded in mystique. You know they're incredibly powerful. You know they've been alive for thousands of years, but you don't really know what the extent of their power is. You don't know anything about their personality, really, either. In Memories of Ice, they still have a ton of mystique, and there's still a general fog around them, but the fog kind of starts to clear as the book goes along. They don't come across as human characters, that's for sure. You start to get a more fleshed out view of their personality and who they are and why they do what they do. And they're just two badass characters. It was really fun to read several of the main scenes where they're featured, and you get to actually see them finally use some of the abilities that they have. Kaladin Brood in particular, because I feel like Anomander Rake has some scenes in Gardens of the Moon where we get to understand exactly how powerful he is, and not only how powerful he is, but how powerful the Tisti Andi are and the dragons that he controls. But when Kaladin Brood finally takes out his hammer in Memories of Ice, that is just like It's just a pretty epic scene. I found it to be a pretty humorous scene, which I'm not going to go into detail about that, but you'll find out why if you read the book. 𝒂💏 has a major role in book 3. He was one of the main characters in book 1, and I think he features an even larger role in book 3. I think his point of view might be, it's definitely one of the points of view that we spend the most time with. Paran's storyline is about him receiving this incredible responsibility. It happens about a quarter of the way through the book. It's not something he was looking for. It's not something he wanted, but it's just kind of this burden is dropped on his shoulders at one point. He wants nothing to do with it. He just kind of rejects the responsibility and the power that comes with this responsibility. He doesn't know why he's been chosen for this. And it starts to eat away at him from the inside. And I think that's because it's like anything in life. Sometimes there's just certain things that you have to deal with, certain responsibilities that you have to take care of. It doesn't matter whether or not you want to do this thing. You just have to do it. That's what's going on with Paran. And so as he rejects this responsibility, it makes him sick, anxious, starts to affect his mental state. And you can see that over the course of the book, as you move farther along, he just slowly starts to deteriorate the farther and farther away he pushes this responsibility, until finally he kind of realizes what's going on and realizes that, hey, I might not have asked for this, but I got to handle it. And when he finally does decide to handle it, it's just a very satisfying feeling of watching somebody, about face and, conquer a fear that they had. Paran's going to clearly have a massive role in the books to come. So let's talk about 𝒂💏. This guy is one of the cockiest motherfuckers in the book, 100%. I think at some point his cockiness is going to bite him in the ass, but for now it seems like he's able to scrape out of almost any situation that he lands himself in through just pure trickery. In book 1, it's kind of, he's introduced as the Bridgeburners squad mage. And at the time, there's all these high mages around and people who are supposed to be more powerful than 𒂂💏. But for some reason, Whiskey Jack and Dewjack One Arm seem to respect 𒂂💏's opinion a ton. The Bridgeburners look to 𒂂💏 for advice. He's got a lot more responsibility than a regular squad mage would have. In book 3, it's explained how he joined the Bridgeburners. There's this one scene where Whiskey Jack sits down and has drinks with Anomander Rake and kind of goes into explaining how the Bridgeburners found 𒂂💏. And all of a sudden it starts to make a lot more sense why everybody respects him and why he feels more powerful than he was initially described. There's some great action scenes with 𒂂💏 in this book. One scene in particular where he sits down with a pair of very powerful necromancers, and they're almost talking like colleagues for a little bit. The necromancers are trying to pick his brain about certain subjects, but the conversation doesn't go quite how these necromancers wanted to go. That is a spectacular scene. And I think the main thing to note about 𒂂💏 in Memories of Ice is that his main storyline for the series starts to reveal itself. And I can't talk about too many of the details of that without giving away spoilers, but essentially, I think I can say this, is that 𒂂💏 has a plan to trick or challenge a god. And it seems inconceivable that he could do that, but somehow by the end of the book, you're like, I don't know what he's planning, but I can't wait to see it unfold, and I think he's going to do it, but you just don't. It seems ridiculous. So very much looking forward to seeing where that storyline goes in the books to come. So book 2, Dead House Gates, was a very dark book, and book 3 is very dark as well. Has a lot of terrible moments in it, but I would say the way that it differs in tone from book 2 is that there's this really strong theme of compassion, love, and hope in the book. It's not nearly, there is some optimism in the book. It's not all just death and dying and tragedy. There are some really good redeeming moments where characters are able to see the good in the world. And I think one of the characters who really holds up this pillar of the book is the shield anvil of the Grey Swords, 𝒂💏. When he first enters the book, I thought that he was going to be a rather minor character, and boy was I wrong, because as the book goes on, his role to play just gets more and more massive, even to the point where he has one of the primary roles in the finale of the book. So his job as the shield anvil of the Grey Swords is to take on the burden of pain, grief, suffering from other people who can no longer bear that burden. And he takes it on and experiences that pain himself. And for some reason, he has the ability to do this, granted to him by his God. There are a couple key moments where he does this throughout the book, where he takes on other people's suffering. And it's just the way that Erikson writes these scenes it's just beautiful. So yeah, it definitely wasn't a character I was expecting to love, but by the end of the book, I was just cheering for 𝒂𝒊𝒏 the whole way. I think it was important to have a character like 𝒂𝒊𝒏 in book 3 because it kind of breaks the cycle of darkness and despair. And gives us something to cheer for and something to feel optimistic about moving forward from here. So if I went over every character's relationship in this book, I think this video would be 4 or 5 hours long, because every Malazan book has hundreds of characters, it feels like. Maybe not hundreds, but at least dozens. But I think my favorite relationship in this particular book was between 𝒂𝒊 the Younger, the Malazan spy, and Tool, who is the first sword of the 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒐. At the end of book 1, 𝒂𝒊 the Younger is thrown into a warren during a magical fight, and at the beginning of book 3, he's kicked out of that warren. I believe it was the Warren of Chaos. Correct me in the comments if I was wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's the warren he was stuck in. He's kicked out of the Warren of Chaos, lands on some beach somewhere, and realizes that he's probably lost 3 or 4 months of time. He has some vague memories of what happened in the warren. Something's happened inside of him. He has a sense of that, but he doesn't know exactly what's going on. So as he kind of gets his bearings, he comes across Tool, and they know of each other from their experiences in book 1, and they decide to start traveling together. Along the way, they pick up some very powerful companions that they're going to travel with, and that would be Lady Envy, who's an incredibly powerful sorceress with some ties to the backstory of this whole world. We won't get into that in this, but if you read the book, there's some really juicy details about her involvement in the main storyline. There are 2 massive wolves or hounds, dogs, massive canines that travel with them, and they're super powerful as well, kind of like the Hounds of Shadow. There are also 3 Segula, which are Lady Envy's bodyguards, and they're essentially the most badass assassins in this world. They have no magical powers to speak of, but they're just experts at man-to-man combat. And so this extremely powerful small group of individuals is traveling on a path to kill the Panian Seer. And along the way, Tool and 𝒂𝒊 become friends. I almost didn't even realize that a 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒐 could have a friend, because they feel like such dry characters, especially in book 1. Tool comes across as like almost like a brick wall at times, especially when he's traveling with adjunct Lorne. There are a couple smatterings of humor from Tool from every once in a while. He's got this dry sarcasm that he uses from time to time, which I really enjoyed it. But he does, he's an undead warrior. Personality is not his strength, let's just put it that way. But as he becomes closer friends with 𝒂𝒊, you kind of get to start to see the side of him that was once flesh and bone, before the ritual that turned the 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒏 into the undead and set them on this chase after the 𝒊𝒂𝒂𝒏 for an eternity. And I don't think I didn't really get any sense of that before this friendship with 𝒂𝒊, where you start to see this side of the 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒏. And overall, they just, the 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒏, especially in this book, you start to feel really sad about their scenario, because it feels like they didn't know what they were signing up for when this ritual happened. They just knew that they were going to get the power they needed to defeat their enemy, but I don't think they realized the consequences of committing to this ritual. And you'll see Tool battling with that throughout the book. Now, as this troop of individuals gets closer and closer to the Panian Seer, things are getting more and more dangerous. There's more and more fights going on. And 𝒂𝒊 the Younger realizes that, hey, I'm the only human in this group, the least powerful individual here. I'm probably just either going to get them in trouble, or I'm going to get myself killed, because I'm not going to be able to protect myself in the battles to come. So why don't I split off and go in my own way and try to link up with the Malazans? So that's what he does. He splits off and goes after the Malazans. But along the way, of course, he gets captured by the Panian Seer's forces, and his storyline just goes down an incredibly dark route, where he's essentially broken down. His mental state is destroyed. He becomes a shell of himself. Tool finds out about this, finds out about the fact that he's been captured, and proceeds to go on a journey to save Tak the Younger. And I don't know, this just results in some incredibly epic scenes towards the end of the book where Tool is using all of his abilities to save Tak. And the way that Steven Erikson writes it, I don't know, it just is like there's a lot of badass action going on, but it's heartwarming the way that Tool is chasing down Tak and trying to save him. And I just thought it was something I wasn't expecting from the book. So when it finally came to fruition, it was just incredibly satisfying. Like I said, if I kept talking about all the different characters in this book, this review would be incredibly long. So I'm going to wrap it up there. And in conclusion, I gave this book a 9.5 out of 10. I found it incredibly enjoyable. I'm honestly I would have given it a 10 out of 10, but I'm leaving room to be surprised by the other books. Maybe there's one better than this, so I didn't want to give it a 10 out of 10 just yet. Steven Erikson's just an expert at creating this web of mystery and connection. He basically drops the reader into this web, right? And the reader gets stuck, and it's the reader's job to figure out these mysteries as the books go along. And as you figure those mysteries out, you start to untangle the web. And as you're untangling things, you start to understand where the story's going and why these characters are doing what they're doing. And I just think that makes the effort of reading these books so worthwhile. Very much looking forward to reading House of Chains book 4. I will have a review for that when I'm done. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, give me a like down below. Subscribe to the channel for more in the future, and I will see you in the next book review.